Echoes of eternity, the quest for the seven wonders imagined standing at the edge of the world, where the horizon isn't just a line but a threshold into the impossible. We live in an age of glass skyscrapers and digital clouds, yet we are haunted by a ghost, the ghost of a list written 2,000 years ago. It was a list not of things to buy, but of things to behold before you die. They were called the themata, the sights, but the world came to know them as the seven wonders. This is not just a story of stone and mortar. It is a story of human ego, divine obsession, and the heartbreaking realization that even the greatest triumphs of man are but dust in the scales of time. I, the survivor. The Great Pyramid of Giza in the year 2560 BCE, the Egyptian sun didn't just shine, it commanded. Pharaoh Khufu, a man who viewed himself less as a king and more as a sun god in waiting, looked at the Giza plateau and saw a canvas for eternity. The Great Pyramid is the only wonder that remains standing today, and perhaps that is because it was never meant to be a building. It was meant to be a machine for immortality. To a modern American or European traveler today, the pyramid looks like a rugged, tan mountain of stone. But if you had stood there 4,000 years ago, you would have been blinded. It was encased in polished Tura limestone, white as a fallen cloud, and topped with a pyramidion of solid gold. When the sun hit it, the pyramid didn't just reflect light, it seemed to generate it. The engineering is where the wonder truly begins. We are talking about 2.3 million blocks of stone, some weighing up to 80 tons. How did they align it to true north with an accuracy of within 3/60ths of a degree? They didn't have GPS or lasers. They had the stars and a profound understanding of the A=/pi r2 of the universe before the Greeks even had an alphabet. As you walk through the Grand Gallery today, the air grows thin and the silence becomes heavy. You realize that Khufu succeeded. He wanted to be remembered forever. 4.5 millennia later, we are still whispering his name. But the Great Pyramid is the exception. For the rest of the wonders, the story turns from triumph to tragedy. Ay ay. The ghost, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. If the pyramid is the survivor, the Hanging Gardens are the mystery. To this day, archaeologists argue whether they existed at all, or if they were the world's first piece of fake news. The legend tells of King Nebuchadnezzar II, a fierce warrior with a soft heart for his wife, Amides of Media. She missed the green, rolling hills of her homeland, find the flat, dusty plains of Mesopotamia unbearable. So the king did what any powerful husband would do. He moved the mountains to her. He built a series of tiered brick terraces, rising like a green mountain into the sky. It was a botanical marvel of the ancient world. But here is the technical miracle. How do you water a mountain in a desert? The Babylonians likely used a primitive version of the Archimedes screw, centuries before Archimedes was born, to pump water from the Euphrates River to the highest terrace. Imagine the scent of jasmine and cedar wafting over the city walls of Babylon while the desert heat shimmered below. It was a man-made paradise, yet today there is nothing. No stone, no root, no trace. Some say the gardens were actually in Nineveh, others say they were a poet's dream. But perhaps that is their power. They exist only in the imagination, the one place where flowers never wither. Ay, ay, ay. The god, the statue of Zeus at Olympia. If you were an athlete in 435 BCE, traveling to the Olympic Games, you weren't just there to run or wrestle. You were there to face God. Phidias, the greatest sculptor of antiquity, was tasked with creating a seated figure of Zeus that would make men tremble. And he did. The statue was 40 feet tall. If Zeus had stood up, he would have unroofed the temple. He was made of chryselephantine, a skeleton of wood covered in thin plates of ivory for the skin and shimmering gold for the robes. His eyes were precious gems that seemed to follow you. In his right hand, he held a figure of Nike victory, and in his left, a scepter topped with an eagle. But it wasn't just the scale, it was the atmosphere. Phidias built a shallow pool of olive oil in front of the statue. The oil served two purposes. It kept the ivory from cracking in the humidity, and it acted as a giant mirror, reflecting the golden glow of the statue upward, making the god seem to radiate light from within. When the Roman Emperor Caligula later tried to steal the statue, legend says the scaffolding collapsed, and the statue let out a peal of laughter so loud the workmen fled in terror. Zeus remained in his temple for 800 years until he was carried off to Constantinople, where a fire finally did what no mortal dared. It turned the god of thunder to ash. IV, the ambition. The temple of Artemis at Ephesus in the city of Ephesus, modern-day Turkey. They didn't just build a temple, they built a forest of marble. The temple of Artemis was 4 times the size of the Parthenon in Athens. It had 127 columns, each 60 feet tall, and it was the first great structure built entirely of marble. It was a place of sanctuary. If you were a runaway slave or a political refugee, if you touched the walls of the temple, you were safe. It was the Wall Street of the ancient world, housing the richest bank in the Mediterranean. But the story of Artemis is also a story of the dark side of the human ego. On a summer night in 356 BCE, a man named Herostratus walked into the temple and set it on fire. Why? He didn't hate Artemis. He just wanted his name to live forever in history. The Ephesians were so horrified that they executed him and passed a law forbidding anyone from ever speaking his name, a damnatio memoriae. Of course, the plan backfired. By trying to erase his name, they made him legendary. The irony: on the very night the temple burned, Alexander the Great was born. When Alexander later offered to rebuild the temple, the Ephesians politely declined, saying, "It is not fitting for one god to build a temple to another." The mausoleum at Halicarnassus, we use the word mausoleum today to describe any grand tomb, but the word actually comes from one man, King Mausolus. He was a provincial governor in the Persian Empire, but he lived like a king. When he died, his wife and sister, history is messy, Artemisia, was so struck by grief that she decided to build him a tomb that would dwarf the palaces of the living. She hired the 4 greatest sculptors of Greece, giving each one side of the building to decorate. It was a fusion of 3 cultures: Egyptian, the pyramid roof; Greek, the columns; and Lycian, the elevated base. At the very top stood a massive marble chariot pulled by 4 horses, carrying the spirits of the king and queen into the heavens. It stood for 1,500 years. It survived the fall of empires and the rise of new religions. It was eventually toppled by an earthquake, and its stones were used by the Knights of St. John to build a castle. If you go to Bodrum, Turkey today, you can see the castle walls. And if you look closely, you'll see the polished green marble of a king's grief recycled into a fortress. VI, the giant. The Colossus of Rhodes is a beautiful island, but in 305 BCE it was a war zone. After surviving a massive siege by the Macedonians, the people of Rhodes were left with a massive amount of abandoned bronze war machinery. Instead of melting it down for coins, they decided to build a victory monument to their patron god, Helios. The Colossus was 110 feet tall, roughly the same height as the Statue of Liberty, without the pedestal. For 12 years, the sculptor Charles of Lindos worked on it. It was built with iron tie bars and weighted with stones. When it was finished, it was a bronze titan guarding the harbor. Contrary to popular belief, it didn't straddle the harbor entrance. That's physically impossible for the time. It stood on a pedestal to the side, its hand raised to shade its eyes or holding a torch. It was the shortest-lived wonder. Just 54 years after it was built, an earthquake snapped it at the knees. The Oracle of Delphi warned the Rhodians not to rebuild it, saying they had offended the sun god. For 800 years, the giant lay in the dust. Even in ruins, it was so massive that tourists traveled from across the Roman Empire just to try and wrap their arms around its thumb. Eventually, it was sold for scrap metal to a merchant who needed 900 camels to carry the bronze away. The sun god was sold by the pound. VII. The beacon, the lighthouse of Alexandria. Finally, we come to the only wonder that was built for a practical purpose: to save lives. The city of Alexandria was the New York of the ancient world, a melting pot of science, philosophy, and trade. But the coast of Egypt was dangerously flat and full of hidden reefs. To guide the ships, Sostratus of Cnidus built the Pharos. It was over 350 feet tall, built in 3 stages, square at the bottom, octagonal in the middle, and cylindrical at the top. At the very peak, a massive fire burned at night, while during the day, a giant bronze mirror reflected the sun. It is said the light could be seen for 30 miles out at sea. There are legends that this mirror was so powerful it could be used to focus sunlight and burn enemy ships before they reached the harbor, the world's first laser. While that's likely a myth, the Pharos was very real. It survived until the 14th century, outlasting almost all its peers. Today, its stones lie at the bottom of the Mediterranean, where divers can still swim among the ruins of the light that once guided the ancient world. The lesson of the seven: why do we care about these seven? Hundreds of other magnificent buildings existed. But these seven represent a specific moment in human history when we realized that through math, art, and sheer will, we could rival the gods. They show us the cycle of humanity. We build the pyramid, we dream the gardens, we worship Zeus, we protect Artemis, we mourn the mausoleum, we celebrate the Colossus. And we guide the lighthouse. The wonders are gone, but the wonder remains. As long as we keep building, keep dreaming, and keep looking at the stars, the story of the seven wonders is never truly finished. Part II, the stone giant of the Sahara, the Great Pyramid of Giza in the year 2560 BCE, the Giza Plateau was not a silent graveyard of stone. It was the largest construction site in human history. To understand the Great Pyramid, you must first forget everything you've seen in Hollywood movies. There were no whips, no thousands of starving slaves being dragged across the sand. Instead, this was a national project of pride. The engineering of eternity pharaoh Khufu, known to the Greeks as Cheops, didn't just want a tomb, he wanted a celestial staircase. His vizier and chief architect, Himiunu, faced a challenge that would break a modern engineer. They had to move 2.3 million stone blocks, each weighing between 2.5 to 80 tons. The precision is what haunts modern scientists. The base of the pyramid is leveled to within 5 centimeters across a 13-acre area. The four sides are aligned almost perfectly with the cardinal points: north, south, east, and west. To achieve this without a compass, Himiunu's surveyors used the stars, likely tracking the movement of a circumpolar star and bisecting the angle of its rising and setting. Imagine the logistics: the white casing. The pyramid wasn't always brown and jagged. It was covered in 100,000 tons of polished Tura limestone. On a clear day, it could be seen from the mountains of Israel, glowing like a diamond on the horizon. The internal mystery: inside, the Grand Gallery is a masterpiece of corbelled vaulting. The king's chamber is made of massive red granite blocks transported 500 miles away from Aswan. How did they lift 80-ton stones 150 feet into the air? The leading theory suggests an internal ramp system, a spiraling corkscrew of stone hidden within the pyramid's core. The human story behind the stones were the people. Excavations have found the builder's town, where workers were fed prime beef, beer, and bread. They were divided into files or gangs with names like the Friends of Khufu or the Drunkards of Menkora. They left graffiti on the stones, joking and competing with each other. It was a massive social contract. The people gave their labor, and in return, the pharaoh ensured the cosmic order, Ma'at dollar, was maintained. Part III, the vertical forest, the hanging gardens of Babylon as we sail from the Nile to the Euphrates. The landscape changes from golden sand to mud brick grandeur. Babylon was the center of the world under Nebuchadnezzar II, but the hanging gardens were a project of pure, desperate love. A mountain for a queen, Queen Amydes, daughter of the Medes' king, found Babylon suffocating. Her home in Persia was full of mountains, waterfalls, and lush greenery. Babylon was flat, hot, and dusty. To keep her from falling into a terminal depression, Nebuchadnezzar commanded his engineers to build a mechanical mountain. The hydrology of wonder, the gardens were built on high stone terraces, stacked like a ziggurat. But plants need water, and in the Babylonian heat, they need a lot of it. This is where the true wonder lay. Deep within the core of the structure, hidden from view, were massive chain pumps. Slaves or oxen worked treadmills that turned a series of buckets on a chain, lifting water from the Euphrates River to the highest levels. From the top, the water was released into artificial streams and waterfalls that cascaded down the terraces, cooling the air by as much as 10-15 degrees. It was the world's first large-scale air conditioning system. To prevent the water from rotting the mud brick structure below, the Babylonians used layers of reeds, bitumen natural asphalt, and even sheets of lead. The tragedy of disappearance, why is there no trace of it today? Unlike the pyramids of stone, the gardens were a living organism. When the irrigation systems failed and the empire collapsed, the plants died, the lead was stolen, and the mud bricks dissolved back into the earth. It is the only wonder that remains a mythic ghost, reminding us that even the most beautiful things require constant care to survive. Part IV, the goddess of marble, the temple of Artemis at Ephesus across the Aegean Sea, in the bustling port of Ephesus, stood a building so magnificent that the historian Philo of Byzantium wrote, "When I saw the temple of Artemis, the other wonders lost their brilliance." The scale of divinity completed around 550 BCE, this temple was massive. It was the first grand building made almost entirely of marble. It stood on a platform the size of 2 American football fields. Its 127 columns were each 60 feet tall, equivalent to a 6-story building, and many of them were intricately carved at the base with scenes of gods and heroes. The night of the fire, the story of its destruction, is as famous as its construction. On July 21, 356 BCE, a man named Herostratus decided he wanted to be famous. He didn't have talent, so he chose destruction. He set fire to the wooden roof beams of the temple. The marble cracked in the intense heat and the roof collapsed. The Ephesians were so disgusted by this fame-seeking act that they banned his name from history. But as fate would have it, a historian named Theopompus recorded it anyway. On that same night, Alexander the Great was being born in Macedonia. Legend says Artemis was too busy helping with Alexander's birth to save her own temple. The resurrection, Alexander later offered to rebuild the temple, but the Ephesians gave him a legendary burn in response. It is not fitting for one god to build a temple for another. They eventually rebuilt it themselves, even grander than before, and it served as a sanctuary for over 600 years, acting as the wealthiest bank in the ancient world, until it was finally razed by Goths in 262 CE. Part V, the Golden God, the statue of Zeus at Olympia. Now we travel to the heart of Greece, to the site of the original Olympic Games. Here, the wonder wasn't a building, but a resident. The artist's workshop Phidias, the Michelangelo of the ancient world, was commissioned to create a statue of Zeus. He set up a workshop exactly the same size as the temple's inner sanctum. For 8 years, he and his team worked with ivory, gold, ebony, and precious stones. The illusion of presence when the doors to the temple of Zeus were opened, the effect was psychological. The statue was 40 feet tall, seated on a throne. Zeus held a life-size statue of Nike in his hand. If he had stood up, he would have literally broken the roof. Phidias used a brilliant trick. He polished the ivory skin of Zeus with olive oil every day. The oil pooled in a shallow basin in front of the statue, creating a mirror effect. As the sun shone through the high windows, the light reflected off the oil and onto the golden robes and ivory skin, making the statue appear to glow with a divine, supernatural light. Travelers reported that looking into the eyes of the statue could make a man forget all his earthly troubles. It wasn't just art, it was an experience. Even the Roman general Paulus was moved to his soul when he saw it, feeling he was in the presence of the living God. Part VI, the king's eternal grief, the mausoleum at Halicarnassus in modern-day Bodrum, Turkey, we find the story of Mausolus, a king who was technically a subject of the Persian Empire, but lived like a Greek tyrant. When he died in 353 BCE, his wife, Queen Artemisia II, was so devastated that she allegedly mixed his ashes into her daily wine to keep him a part of her body. A new architectural language to honor him, she didn't build a Greek temple or an Egyptian pyramid. She built a hybrid. It had a massive rectangular base, Lycian style, 36 Ionic columns, Greek style, and a stepped pyramid roof with 24 levels, Egyptian style. The most wonderful part was the sculpture. 4 of the greatest Greek artists, Scopas, Bryaxis, Leochares, and Timotheus, each took one side of the building. They competed to see who could create the most lifelike marble figures of lions, horses, and warriors. The word mausoleum comes from his name, and for 1,500 years this structure stood as the definition of a grand tomb. It survived until the 12th century, when a series of earthquakes brought the chariot crashing down. Today, you can go to the British Museum and see the massive marble horses that once stood 140 feet in the air. Part VII, the Bronze Titan, the Colossus of Rhodes was the Hong Kong of the ancient Mediterranean, a wealthy, independent trade hub. After defeating a massive invasion force in 304 BCE, the Rhodians sold the abandoned siege engines for a fortune and decided to build a statue of their patron god, Helios. The bronze skeleton, the sculptor Charles of Lindos, faced a massive engineering hurdle. How do you make a 110-foot-tall bronze statue stand up against the wind? He used a skeleton of iron bars and heavy stone blocks inside the hollow bronze skin. It was built from the ground up, with workers piling earth around the statue as it grew, creating a massive ramp that allowed them to work higher and higher. It took 12 years of grueling labor. When it was finished, the sun god Helios stood tall, his bronze skin catching the first rays of the morning sun. The fall of the knee just 54 years later, an earthquake hit. The Colossus didn't fall over completely. It snapped at the knees and crashed onto the land. The Oracle of Delphi told the people not to rebuild it, so the giant lay in the harbor for nearly 800 years. Even as a ruin, it was a tourist attraction. Pliny the Elder wrote that few people could even wrap their arms around its thumb. Part VII, the final beacon, the Pharos of Alexandria. Our journey ends where the ancient world's knowledge began, Alexandria. The lighthouse Pharos was the world's first skyscraper with a purpose. A pillar of fire built around 280 BCE, it was over 350 feet tall. It was divided into 3 stages, a square base, an octagonal middle, and a round top. At the very top, a massive fire was kept burning 24/7. Behind the fire sat a massive curved mirror, likely made of polished bronze. This mirror was a masterpiece of ancient optics. It could project the light of the fire so far that sailors could see it 30 to 40 miles away. There are even legends that the mirror could be adjusted to focus sunlight and burn enemy ships. Though this is likely an exaggeration, it shows the awe the technology inspired. The end of the era, the Pharos survived longer than almost any other wonder except the Great Pyramid. It guided ships for 1,500 years, through the Roman Empire, the Byzantine era, and into the Islamic Golden Age. It was finally destroyed by earthquakes in the 14th century. In the 1990s, underwater archaeologists found its massive stone blocks and statues at the bottom of the Alexandria harbor, where they still rest today, a playground for fish and divers. Part IX, the Scroll of Ariston, Journey to the Horizon. The year is 140 BCE. Ariston sits in a small, salt-aired tavern in the port of Rhodes. Beside him lies a piece of papyrus that would eventually become the world's most famous bucket list. To the Greeks of this era, the world was expanding, but the shadows of the past were growing longer. Ariston isn't just looking for buildings, he is looking for the soul of the Mediterranean. The dust of eternity, arrival at Giza. Ariston's first stop was the land of the pharaohs. Even in 140 BCE, the Great Pyramid was already ancient, built 2,400 years before he was even born. To Ariston, the pyramid was as old as the Roman Empire is to us today. As his barge moved down the Nile, the tip of the pyramid appeared. It was still covered in its white limestone casing. It looked like a triangle of fallen light. It does not look like it was built by men, Ariston wrote in his journal. It looks like the earth itself grew a tooth to bite the sun. He met a local priest named Hemnetger, who explained the geometry of the structure. The priests knew things that the Greeks were only beginning to grasp. They understood the ratio of the pyramid's perimeter to its height, which remarkably approximates 2/pi$. \frac \text perimeter 2 \times \text height. \approx \pi$. Ariston crawled into the ascending passage. He described the Grand Gallery not as a tomb, but as a cathedral of silence. The stones were fitted so tightly that he couldn't even slide his thin bronze stylus between them. He felt the weight of millions of tons of granite above his head, a physical manifestation of a pharaoh's ego turned into a mathematical absolute. The scent of impossible rain. Babylon from Egypt, Ariston traveled east, following the Silk Road routes into Mesopotamia. Babylon was a city of blue glazed bricks and lions of Ishtar. but he was there for the gardens that fly. By the time Ariston arrived, the gardens were in decline, but the machinery still hummed. He described the sound of the Archimedean screws, massive wooden devices encased in leather that groaned as they lifted water from the Euphrates. The physics of the paradise, to keep the massive terraces from collapsing under the weight of the wet soil and the trees, some of which were full-grown cedars. The Babylonian architects used a layering technique that Ariston found ingenious. 1. Bottom layer, massive stone slabs rare in Babylon, imported at high cost. 2. Middle layer, reeds soaked in bitumen natural tar to create a waterproof seal. 3. Top layer, 2 courses of brick, and a layer of lead to prevent roots from penetrating the structure. Ariston walked through the shades of Amides. While the desert outside was a blistering 45/circ/text $, the interior of the garden was a mist-filled 25/circ/text $. He realized the gardens weren't just a gift for a queen, they were a defiance of nature itself. Man had created a mountain where God had intended a desert. Part X, the artisan's prayer, Ephesus and Olympia. Ariston sailed back toward the Aegean. His next stops were the homes of the gods. The Temple of Artemis, the marble forest in Ephesus. Ariston was stunned by the sheer whiteness of the Temple of Artemis. He arrived during the Artemisia festival. The temple wasn't just a building, it was a city within a city. He interviewed an old stonemason who was repairing one of the 127 columns. The mason explained that the foundation was built on a marsh. Why a marsh? To protect the building from the frequent earthquakes of the region. They laid down a bed of charcoal and sheepskins to act as a shock absorber. The Greeks build for beauty, the mason told Ariston. Tie letter E41, tie letter E15, but the Ephesians build for the earth's anger. Ariston noted the fame of Herostratus. Even 200 years later, people whispered the name of the man who burned the temple. It was a lesson in the fragility of wonder. It takes 120 years to build a masterpiece and 1 hour for a fool with a torch to destroy it. The statue of Zeus, the mirror of olive oil crossing the mountains into the Peloponnese. Ariston reached Olympia. He stood before the statue of Zeus. The temple was dark, save for a pool of olive oil on the floor. Ariston noticed that as the priest opened the great bronze doors, the morning sun hit the oil and reflected upward, illuminating Zeus's face. The ivory skin of the god seemed to breathe. He met a descendant of Phidias, the sculptor who still maintained the statue. He learned that the gold on Zeus's robe was removable. It was a reserve of wealth for the city. If Olympia faced a financial crisis, they could unrobe the god, use the gold, and replace it later. It was the world's most beautiful central bank. Part XI. The architecture of grief and glory. Ariston's journey now took him to the coast of Caria and the islands of the sea. The mausoleum, the silent chariot in Halicarnassus. Ariston saw the tomb of Mausolus. What fascinated him wasn't the size, but the motion. The 4 greatest sculptors of the age, Scopas, Bryaxis, Leochares, and Timotheus, had carved figures that looked like they were caught in mid-action. The marble lions looked ready to spring. The horses on the roof seemed to be galloping into the clouds. Ariston realized that this was the purpose of a wonder, to freeze time. Mausolus was dead, but his marble chariot was forever in mid-race. The Colossus, the bronze ghost. When Ariston reached his home in Rhodes, he was greeted by a tragedy. The Colossus, the pride of his people, was on the ground. An earthquake had snapped it 50 years prior. He walked among the ruins. He climbed inside the hollow head of Helios. He described the internal ribbing of iron, the first time a building used a curtain wall technique, where the outer skin, bronze, was separate from the structural frame, iron and stone. Even in its broken state, the Colossus was a wonder. It proved that human ambition could reach the sky, even if the earth occasionally shook us back down. Part XII, the guardian of the sea. The Pharos. Ariston's final destination was the capital of the world, Alexandria. He stood at the base of the Pharos, the lighthouse. He climbed the spiral ramp, which was wide enough for 2 loaded donkeys to pass each other. He saw the Great Mirror. The keepers of the light were secretive, but Ariston suspected the mirror was a complex assembly of polished bronze plates, curved to a precise parabolic shape. He stood at the top, 350 feet above the sea. From there, the world looked different. He could see the curvature of the horizon. He realized that the seven wonders were more than just buildings. They were the landmarks of the human spirit. "We are small," Ariston wrote as his final entry, "but we build things that make us feel tall. We are mortal, but we build things that are eternal." These seven sites are the anchors we throw into the future so that we are never forgotten. The modern echo, why they still matter today. As we look at the ruins of Ephesus or the base of the Pharaohs, we aren't just looking at old rocks. We are looking at the blueprints of our own civilization. The Great Pyramid taught us about precision and logistics. The Hanging Gardens were the ancestors of our green skyscrapers. The Pharaohs was the grandfather of the GPS and the satellite, systems designed to guide us through the dark. The statue of Zeus and the temple of Artemis showed us that art and faith are the primary drivers of human effort. The mausoleum gave us the language of remembrance. The Colossus proved that we can use the tools of war, bronze siege engines, to create a monument to peace. The story of the seven wonders is the story of us. It is the story of a species that refuses to be limited by its own lifespan. We build because we must. We wonder because we can. Thanks for watching.